Yeah, I mean, I suppose you may be absolutely right. I suppose my question comes from a slightly different place, and maybe laser isn't the right forum or mechanism. It comes out of a conversation with a lot of people on the Leonardo board, saying that in a way Leonardo was born to facilitate, to encourage collaboration across art sci tech, and to do that through offering publishing opportunities is, of course, one way. You know, to move into residencies is another way, but to really more proactively support collaborative research that meets the original aims is what I'm trying to respond to. So we'll move ahead with it in some way. It may not be that laser is the network, the bit of Leonardo activity that lends itself to this aim. Jill, do you want to?
Jill?
Yeah, I actually think there's something there that might be interesting, Alan. Maybe it's to do with this idea of thematic kind of controversies. You know, that like some of these controversies that come up in laser, some of these themes could kind of create a lateral dialogue that might be able to be facilitated with a learning lab. Like, for example, you know, what's the difference? You know, there's a set of what we call practicing PhD students, you know, practicing, but also theoretical PhD students who are looking for these sorts of philosophical ties between different disciplines and looking for a way to find research and knowledge around these areas. So maybe laser would generate some of this knowledge, and then somehow we would be able to somehow put it onto a different platform to share it. So that, like, if you wanted to look up something to do with a particular, say, controversy that might affect art and science, you might go to a learning lab and then you'll find out much deeper kind of information. Would that be something that might be appealing, or?
Or maybe if...
Go ahead, Alan.
Oh, sorry. Certainly the idea that I mean, it's a question back in a way. Does the laser network have the capacity to identify, not just in individual sites, but across the network? Maybe that's what you've been doing. I mean, I haven't been with you. These thematic consistencies, inconsistencies, controversies. Because if it does, that would be really interesting to know. And that could, even if it was just information that I could run with or others could run with, be really interesting. That'd be a valuable sort of output of the network. Is that what's going on? Is that what you've been doing?
Well, it's just that there's a fair amount of indirect and creative approaches that are really based on a kind of analysis between, or the line between objectivity and subjectivity, that are really interesting parts of the philosophical dialogues that we're having. I'm talking about these parts, actually. Whether in fact it might be ways in which the laser can just feed you in particular questions that came up, for example, where we found very fascinating and the audience found very fascinating. And maybe we could just list those to you somehow for your learning lab.
I mean,
I think Jai.
Sorry, David, were you going to come in? Or?
Go ahead, Jai.
Yes, I just, I thought, I mean, even though laser as it stands right now may not have the mechanism to support what Alan is saying, but what Alan is saying, I think, is extremely important. Even from a funding standpoint, as we were talking about yesterday, how do we capture this at least, and how do we go further to deepen the research? I think it's completely valid. And I just reminded me, Alan, of Adrienne Klein. You guys know? Yes. Yeah, in New York, right, Graduate Center of the University of New York, I think. You know, she did the art science symposiums for a decade or more. I think what she did really nicely was at one point, I can't find the website now, but archived all the, at the very least, archived all the topics that the speakers talked about in one concise web page. You know, and then I think what's happening with laser is like all these wonderful things, as Alan talked about, kind of scatter around everywhere. You know, at the very least, maybe all the topics from the speakers, the titles can be all in one place. At least in some ways, that's a beginning point to counter the wonderful research that Alan was talking about.
Yeah. So along,
That might be more possible. Yeah.
Okay. So Scott Thorpe here. I was thinking kind of like you were thinking, because as we're talking about raising money, if you guys write grants and stuff, it's really going to be difficult to disseminate the money in any meaningful and equitable fashion, unless you're going to get $1 million grant. You know, you're going to say, oh, you can have $30, you can have $50. You know, it's not going to be something, it's going to be hard to do. But I think if you get money for grants and you pursue topic-based research, like if we see trends, it doesn't make us change our lasers at all, but it gives us the opportunity, if we see something emerging, that we could go further if we wanted to. I think, you know, from a financial standpoint, I think it's an easier way to support topic-based research rather than the lasers themselves. Because I just see it like a really difficult time for you guys writing a grant and then figuring out a way to get it to all these little bitty entities, you know. And so if you want to push it further to say, hey, let's get some researchers who have common ground or have expressed common interests and put them together, then you have this international consortium that kind of starts more research.
I think you're onto something. Alan, what do you think about that? Does Darlington have some funding that like basically what's coming out of the lasers is sort of like in some sense of trend forecasting in terms of these topical issues, that, you know, these laser hosts can have some support to stay on top of this sort of awareness, and, you know, we can help with, you know, design this a little bit, but if the foundation, if Darlington has like that capacity, would that be something that would be of interest?
It could well be. I mean, you know, in this sort of network that we're putting together, there are, you know, pots of money, you know, reasonable amounts, mostly at the moment to put infrastructure in place, the kind of money you don't normally get, which is great. You know, so to actually sort of support a network. I mean, it seems clear to me, even from the conversation now, you know, that there is a really valuable output from the laser network, which maybe you've been talking about capturing. I mean, just to rephrase the question again, we've been talking about using the UN Sustainable Development Goals to develop a whole curriculum. And, you know, the aim over the next 10 years to speak to all of those UN SDGs. Because they're all clustered, although there's a lot of them, you know, they all cluster as soon as you get into any one of them. But, you know, in a way, you know, another way to think would be, well, you know, you've got this incredible intellectual community who are grappling with complex issues all the time and methodological issues and challenges all the time. And to sort of, you know, one of the ways we've been talking about what we're doing is we're trying to facilitate network intelligence. To solve complex problems. In a way, the collective that is the laser network is defined, or has the capacity to define agendas, to define areas that might respond particularly well or be interesting or particularly challenging when it comes to.
I wonder if every 2 years you can throw forward like a learning lab challenge or something, and all like the laser networks can take it up or not, and maybe you can, networks can organize like a laser based on that particular challenge question, and then see what ideas and solutions emerge from it. And then that could feed into this kind of a collaborative project almost.
Yeah, I was going to say something a little bit like that, although I don't know that any solutions would emerge, but possibly participants might emerge or collaborators might emerge. A couple of related thoughts. This is John Weber here. To a certain extent, a lot of the lasers are based on people with great expertise deliberately giving talks to people who don't have expertise in that area. In other words, whether they could have a PhD in some other area or be an artist showing around the world, but they don't know anything about the person they're listening to. So it's not that the audience isn't educated, it's just that it's educated in a different area, and the lasers are trying to get those audiences together, which means that you're not necessarily talking the way you would talk if you're trying to solve a problem. You're just trying to lay out some initial groundwork. Yeah. And then that's a central piece of what the lasers try to do, and it's maybe not necessarily synergizing well with the kind of what you think to solve problems. That said, what Siddharth just said about periodically offering a topic that you're interested in and asking if anybody wants to do a thematic laser that would bring people together from different fields, and then see who takes the bait and see who is really good. That could be of some interest to you. The kind of lasers that Jill is doing, probably which are more thematic and longer, are probably a lot more relevant than a lot of the lasers that most of us are doing to that kind of problem solving thing that you're working on. It does, though, to me sound like you really need long-term research partnerships with both individuals and institutions who will be in it for a very long and very intense time. And the lasers are set up not to be that. They're set up to be kind of quick pops, if you will, that may spark those kinds of collaborations on campus, but they're not happening in the. They're not really the lasers. They're sort of a stepping stone towards that in some way, maybe. And I also, the last thought is that it's not exactly, I don't know that a community is the word for it. It is a network, but I don't think our speakers think of themselves as part of that. I think they're just doing a talk for this program that's happening on their campus, or that these people that they respect are organizing, and then they go back to doing what they normally do. And I don't think that's a bad thing, but I think it's not what I would call exactly a community.
I think this is Tami. I think it's variable, though. I mean, I think for some people, they have a really strong identity with being art sci tech person, and they find community in it, and they're looking for collaborations, frankly.
Yeah.
So I agree that some lasers are thematic and some aren't. People run them all different ways, which is good and what we want, people to have ownership of how they want to run their lasers. So I like this idea that Siddharth just mentioned, which is to have sort of you put a topic out, and then the lasers can respond to it if they want to use it, and then it creates this kind of feedback to you. I have questions about like the mechanism. It's a little hard for me to get a grasp on it, maybe because it's not fully functioning yet, but so you say it's like a residency program, but it's not a residency program. So I just, so you get this feedback, and there's people who are interested in talking about this thing. And then what happens after that? Like, what's the mechanism you're imagining for people to go forward with? Is that
I mean that's that's another way that might still even be of interest to laser. I don't know. So basically, what I've been doing, so it is something that's been up and running in a way. We're just now formalizing it as a sort of network approach. Is to convene, something very similar to lasers, but convene a series of salons, but where effectively we're gathering people around problems.
Okay.
Out of those, a series of those, we've developed a process for facilitating a kind of collaborative inquiry process, which is more involved, which involves getting people together a couple of times for a few days. And part of what we're doing there is looking how to define collaborative research that is doing this thing of trying to tackle a problem as well as define a method. Out of that starts to come, it's how I've developed a process for also developing a short course portfolio, which is the groundwork for postgraduate degrees, which is the groundwork for sort of leadership programs. So there's a whole trajectory of stuff that we kind of prototyped. So it's initiating a process. We're going to be doing that in a number of different places. The outcomes that we can expect, because we've tested it, are short course portfolio, executive programs, postgrad degrees. Doing that in a number of places and then moving ideas and people around the network is the simple idea. But it starts with something that looks a little bit like a a laser evening. You see what I mean?
Yeah, now it makes more sense to me now. Now I understand the process. Thank you for clarifying.
And I mean, just in terms of funding as well, you know, it might not work for everyone, because I get, you know, especially what you're saying, John, about how it's not in the nature of most of the laser hosts to convene dialogue in that way. It's more like, well, someone's interesting, they're in town, there's a couple of other people, we can curate something here. So it doesn't have that sort of long view.
Right.
But maybe what Jill's saying is different. Maybe there are a couple of people who would be interested. But in terms of funding, if you can kind of say, well, after a period of a number of these, we can start to identify trends, themes, problems that we want to go further with, and take that into another process.
Yeah, well, also
fundraise for.
Also, I think if a lot of us, and I include myself in this, if we knew that we were going to be part of some effort around a really interesting and important problem, because that's definitely something that a lot of us are thinking about, and a lot of the programming I do at Santa Cruz is around that sort of thing. That would be a good excuse, and a very interesting excuse, to do a different sort of laser that time and go to people. In my case, they would mostly be at the university and say, well, we're doing a special laser, and we're doing it in conjunction with this thing that's going on based in the UK, and it's about this issue, and I know you're working on it. And would you come and talk? And then somebody another, would you come and talk? And would you come and talk? And it would still be very laser-like in terms of that transdisciplinary, cross-disciplinary conversation. But that could be an interesting way to do a different one, because I don't mind thematic ones. It's just that they're sometimes more complicated to do, and they constrict you a little bit more. But if they were connected to a potentially important outcome, then that'd be great.
Victoria?
Well, I mean,
I don't think you can see me, but you can hear me.
Yeah. Okay. Victoria wants to say something, Alan.
Yeah, so the way we organize our lasers here, we have a small gallery. We invite someone who's interested in collaboration and also accessing some of the labs that we have access to be in residence and work. So it's not a show in the sense of a gallery show. It's more a person that's investigating something and has that space and can make it public. We kind of estimate when they would be ready to have it public, connected to the laser, that becomes thematically of interest to the artist and vice versa. So when there's a kind of a quote opening, the artist gets the benefit of having a community that's discussing something of interest, let's say biotech or nanotech, environment, whatever. And at the same time, the really good feedback from both the public and people who are interested. And we've seen a number of collaborations emerge from this, that either for the artist or others who are in that topic. So the theme, instead of making it really difficult calling for people to submit for the team, etc., we have the artist in a way become a catalyst that gets people interested to engage in that dialogue. So I find that having an event informal and the laser informal is important, because it keeps it on a social level, which is what makes it different. I personally don't want to go to yet another talk or a number of talks. I feel like we have enough of that. But somehow to generate a discussion and a social environment where people drink and eat, and then the talks are very short, but they actually have the really productive talks when they're sitting around. So the theme, in other words, emerges. That's my 2 cents.
Yeah, it's interesting to have everyone talk about themes so much, because what I heard from what you said actually was about activating our network within our speakers. And that's something that I actually, having been through a couple of lasers, is something that there's a lot of in a way laser alumni, right?
Can you guys hear her online?
Yeah, what she's saying? Yeah.
No, Jane. Sorry, I can't.
Do you want me to move?
Yeah. So
it's breaking up.
The mic. For those in the back, when you guys want to speak, if you guys can come up, come up to the speaking chair.
I'm in the speaking chair. So from what I heard, actually, it's really interesting that people are focusing on the formality as well as the theme. But what I heard that I thought was new about this idea was that finding a way to activate our laser alumni network, because it's quite a large network. And that I thought was quite innovative in regards to trying to reconnect. I mean, I'm friends with the people that we invited to UC Santa Barbara, but that's just 4. But after a while, because other people have been doing this for over a decade, that's a large accumulated mass that we may not be contacting all the time.
I mean, just what's occurring to me, it might not be the sort of right outcome of this conversation, but I, in a way, was really looking for a way with Leonardo, and we've been pursuing this in a number of ways, to at least run a prototype series of labs. You know, so I'm going to be running a pile of these anyway. But we have some decent offers of support, not necessarily enough yet, but to run a prototype series. And it might be interesting to say, well, could there be a link to the laser network? Could this be at least a test, a little experiment? You know, it doesn't need the whole laser network. It might just be, you know, John said, you know, you might be interested in trying something different. Jill does something already along these lines, maybe. Is it a tactic or a strategy for activating a network? Might there be value in that? And run it. If it doesn't deliver anything interesting, I'd be surprised. But yeah.
I mean, I view it as an opportunity for the network, right? So,
Yeah.
So to me, it's like something you can offer to the network in a way, though I guess you want to have it vetted in some way before people are approaching you. But nevertheless, I think it is this kind of opportunity to be offered out once the structure is really there. You know, for people who are thinking about these really important issues, to be able to connect with other people. So I view it as something to offer to the laser network, actually.
Why don't you, if you, not necessarily right now, but maybe in a short email, just say, here's some of the, you know, wicked problems, or however you're calling them. Here's some things that we're thinking about right now. If anybody wants to do laser on one of those, let me know. Just so we have a sense.
Yeah.
What's the shopping list? What's on the menu? And, you know, entree, appetizer.
Well, I think.
Yeah. I like the food thing coming up.
Yeah. You know, so I think there's, you know, the way that the lasers are really organic and self-run and very different, and the resources also vary so dramatically. Mm-hmm. You can't. It's hard to apply any sort of like, you know, sort of template on or formula onto the way that can connect back in, because of the way that the nature of just the organicness of it. But if you take a look at the sort of the entire Leonardo network, rather than just the laser network, that would include authors and leaf folks and contributors and all sorts of people throughout history. I mean, that's a brain trust of, like, you know, tens of thousands of people, you know, a couple, maybe 20, 30,000 people, something like that. What could happen in that sense is to create sort of like a funnel or a filter for these big problems. And I know that we've talked about this, Alan, as we're talking more with other research labs and institutions around the world. It's no longer an interest just to have something that supports everything, but really to look at these big global problems that, quite frankly, a lot of our artists and researchers are interested in anyways. And the Dartington's interested in this, and Arab is interested in this as well. So I think that if we could figure out a way to structure it, again, I think similar to what John was saying, you know, around problems that actually would fulfill the mission of Leonardo, which is to address the problems of the 21st century. We've never, as an organization, really defined what that means of how we address those problems. but it seems to be more and more pertinent, and it comes up literally for me every single week in a conversation. So getting to a point where we can actually say, well, this is how, I think is where we're not there yet, but I want us to get there, and the laser network could help with that. But I think this is a bigger conversation besides just with this network, but really with like sort of the whole entire ecosystem of the art sci tech community. And ideally, with our culmination event in San Francisco next year, we'll be able to create that vision together. But I think part of it is that we need to spend some time taking in that information and then thinking through what does that really mean. I think I think with your help and with the foundation's help, we can get there. But I think this is just one part of a bigger, issue.
Any other
Yeah.
comments?
No, I mean,
Go ahead, John. You go ahead and respond first.
Yeah.
Me?
Yeah.
Well, all I was going to say is, I personally already found that very useful. The sort of range of different feedback and different perspectives on the laser network, what it's doing. I also love the fact that, as you were saying, Victoria, some of my favorite events are not that formal. They're curated, so there's material in the room that inspires conversation. There's opportunities for people to speak, and it goes in whatever direction it needs to go. I love that. Some thoughts about activating the network, the purpose of Leonardo. We're not going to resolve it in this conversation, but some really good feedback for me. I do think we're still sitting with the question, how might we pursue something? But there's an opportunity, and we should just keep talking about it and trying to find out how best to use it. I mean, just to be really concrete, like Dartington and this foundation in Wyoming have basically said, well, we would definitely like to host something which for 3 years, paid for, convening this series of labs, intensive residency, collaborative residency programs gathered around problems. And some of the conversations with Mark, with Roger, with JD, with Danielle, we kind of saying, well, maybe we could use that for a prototype Leonardo lab thing, just to see what that might look like. So we should just keep working at it and seeing. Jill, are you trying to say something?
No, I just think I think it's a good idea, and I actually think that there's a lot of from the talks that we've done, and certainly the talks that I've been in when I worked in other lasers, or when I spoke in other lasers in New York, and I just felt that there's certain kind of conclusions that tend to come up that will address some of the problems you're talking about. So I was just wondering whether it might be two-way, really. We perhaps could give you a list of what we think are interesting problems, and you could give us a list, and that would be a way to start an exchange,
Yeah. Well, I think exactly what John said. What's the entree?
Exactly.
Exactly. Siddharth had one last question, I think.
So the Biomimicry Institute puts out these design challenges every year, and it almost is styled almost like a Kickstarter campaign where anyone from around the world can feed in and write a 2-minute video and a little blurb about how it's supposed to solve the problem. So I think going down the line after those initial thematic lasers and we feed back and forth, if we actually want to implement something, I think a design challenge of that kind would be a good way of kind of getting some implemented projects running, actually. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, totally.
Nina?
And I think
I just would like to very shortly say that I think the knowledge transfer or knowledge sharing with the general public is, if we can have as much general public as possible in our lasers, is very important. And I think that is a priority for me.
Yeah.
But speaking to that, I think to get more public, it should be in public spaces outside of academia.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah. I mean, all kinds of public spaces. Academia can tend to be intimidating or difficult to reach, or
Parking.
Parking, whatever. Parking in LA. I mean, people will still come, and we get the public here, but it takes some effort, and it takes a special public. I like the idea of people randomly walking in and getting surprised.
Yeah, it's hard to find spaces like that, but it's true.
Yeah. Like really public spaces that are not elitist, and you know,
Let's have one outside somewhere.
Exactly.
On the beach.
No, it's true.
No, really. No, I'm being
DIY
serious.
bio on the beach sounds good to me.
Jill, did you want to say something?
The cabana laser.
That's why you're doing it in a cafe.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's great. That's why we're doing it in a cafe.
Yeah.
And the cafe is near the school. You know, it's right near the university, but it is a university cafe, but it's still a cafe in the public.
Yeah, that's nice.
It's not on campus. It's not on campus. But I also think that something about, I don't know, I think problem solving really is an interesting point to talk about, because I think that problem solving is only kind of maybe possible with a kind of retreat, with a kind of real brainstorming. So the question is, how do you facilitate brainstorming into your learning labs, you know?
Yeah.
No, I mean, that's the thing we're mostly working on. That's what we've been mostly prototyping, how to do that.
Well, and how have you come up with that idea? What kind of ideas have you come up with?
Tami.
Yeah.
I have one more thing.
Guy wants to add one last thing, and then we'll wrap this up because we only have 1 more hour for a meeting. So, go ahead.
I just so from what I hear, it seems like there are folks here from academia, others from the community, and I think the the fact that the two are separate is really unfortunate. And then I just wanted to put a plug in for an entity called Imagining America.
Yeah.
It is trying now. It's hosted at UC Davis campus. Yeah, it's really trying to bridge the two. And so hopefully, so it's basically publicly engage the scholarship. I think it could serve to perhaps help both entities out, both in terms of the hosts' efforts as well as the public who come to these events. So Imagining America, you all can Google, and I can send out some information.
Yes, but also A2RU, Alliance for the Arts and the Research Institutions. It's an organization. I'm on 2 national task forces for research and curriculum, and they've connected with Leonardo and Roger last year. So I think that how the kind of discourse comes out of, that's what we want to call it, that comes out of laser and how that connects to some of these other organizations is going to help to disseminate.
Yes. Can I put a plug in for that too? Because Alan actually is running a panel at A2RU around this exact topic. Around what's the name of the topic, Alan, for the A2RU?
It's Cities as Labs, Transdisciplinarity and the Future of the University, I think is the title. But we've got some great people. Actually, Imagining America is coming up a lot, by the way.
Yes.
But yeah, we've got some great people from MIT and Carnegie Mellon and the Royal College and National Academy of Science, basically kind of talking about exactly this problem, how to completely rethink higher education.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much, Alan.
Okay.
Alan, really, really appreciate you coming
Bye.
on.
Thanks very much. And I'll try to answer your question, Jill, another time. We should have another chat about method. But, thanks, everybody. Good to see you.
Bye. Bye-bye.
Bye. Have a glass of wine for us.
Yeah.
Just write to me.
Yeah.
Bye.
All right.
Okay, thanks.
Bye.
And JD didn't come on, huh?
He said he's got pulled into a meeting, and if he can come on, he can. But don't hold up for him.
All right. So thanks, everybody. I thought very engaging topic for us to talk about. So then really it's just meeting wrap. So, we can take...
You're taking notes, right?
What?
You're taking notes on this. Because I haven't taken
notes to me.
By the way, if any of you guys have notes and stuff, please send them to me this week so I can synthesize everything. Yeah.
Good luck with that. If we have only 15 minutes of people wanting to generate, action items, great.
Well, one thing,
Yeah.
one thing that I think would be interesting is just to have a listserv of chairs and co-chairs that we can reply to. Sometimes you can't reply to those, but make sure you can reply to all, just so we can freely communicate. Nothing is responsive. You wanted to post something and you wanted to respond and you could, but it's not anything you'd have to do. But I found some of those, like especially with the public arts one, is very helpful. When I ask for advice, I always get answers. You know? So I think just something like that.
Okay, I've said that.
Yeah, email groups are kind of funny. They don't work all the time, you know. So if you form a listserv, it kind of works better.
Yeah.
I don't think a Facebook group because you got to check it. The email comes in and you kind of see the topic and either delete it or you read it. You know, it's one of those things where you can say, "Oh, I'm interested in that, so I'll read it," or not, and then don't read it.
The thing is that somebody has to sort of deal with the list.
That's the problem.
So we need somebody to volunteer to be in charge of the list.
It's not a problem about Facebook because it's not easy to search for something when you need to go through time, you know, back in time.
Right. No, listserv's a great idea. You just need somebody who's like taking care of it, so it's not, it gets spammed, you know.
Well, I mean, if you set it up as a Google group, it's listserv. You just email that Google email.
Oh, okay.
So, like, if it's the laser chairs Google group, technically it's a group, but it's actually a listserv. You just send it to that same email, and that will be very quick. You know, you guys have in your packets you have everybody's email, but I'll do that so that it gets
just a big Google group.
Yeah, so
that's a good idea.
Yeah, that'll be easier just to add and remove.
We don't change that often too. The chairs of these things.
No.
Yeah.
That's a good idea.
Not a very big group.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's easy fix.
Okay, so that's an easy action item to just set up the Google group. So if you have questions or you want to communicate with people or you're coming to town
I think
or
that
whatever
we
it is.
Be very functional, you know?
Yeah, that's the easiest way to do it.
Yeah. It's just a way to have the community connected really easily, I think.
Does it pop up as a notification via email or how? Does
Yeah,
it
just right into your email.
Yeah, it pops up as a notification. Kind of what we've been doing to organize this meeting, and you guys are getting all the emails, right?
Oh, yeah.
So,
You were using it.
Danielle.
Well, I mean,
sort of.
Yeah, mainly I've been doing that in the Google Calendar invite.
Yeah.
Because
but that's sort of a Google group.
In a sense, but this will be a little bit different.
Yeah, it's a variant on it. So I've heard a lot about funding. I'm sure all of you are thinking about funding in some way.
Always daily.
What?
Daily.
Daily, every day, all day. So the thing that I was thinking is, you know, we were talking about honoraria and that kind of stuff. But actually, I was thinking about funding about people being able to come to these meetings that we've been having. You know, there's people who can't come. They can't afford to come. Yeah. They can't afford housing, whatever. Yeah, I mean, it's expensive to pay if you're not getting funding from your university or whomever to come to these kinds of things. And so I'm wondering about that being a funding goal, so that if we're going to have annual meetings, should be like a primary goal of fundraising for the laser host, because then, you know,
we did
also that you could do.
What?
That you could do. Like for the little lasers, like I was saying earlier, it's harder to do if you're trying to fund lasers, but just to get people here, that you could do.
We did write it into the NEA grant.
Yeah.
If we get, hopefully we can get it, but we did. That was one of the sections, was travel for laser hosts to get to the laser meeting.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Where is the next one?
In Washington D.C.
Oh, it's going to be at.
Oh, you already know?
It's going to.
Well, that was in the grant.
Okay. Oh, so.
No, so if we get the grant, it's in Washington. If we don't get the grant, we can do whatever we want.
So is it JD's hosting?
It does also make sense that JD's. Do you want to tell them about JD's next upcoming role? Because I think that's relevant.
Yeah. So JD's going to take over as laser chair for me.
Oh, that's a big one. Big news.
Bless his heart. Happy that he's doing
Bless your heart.
So yeah, JD's going to take over, and so it sounds like he's planning on hosting the next meeting. I didn't know that actually.
Well, we talked. I mean, I assume that even if it wasn't in the grant, like we would do, but because I think that you know, to be as democratic as possible, we have to figure out. We have to move around from coast to coast in Europe and everywhere, but in Canada, yeah.
How long is the chair position generally?
It hasn't been formalized actually, because there wasn't really a committee until last year. I mean, on the laser board, we formed a committee.
So what's the committee? Sorry.
So it's me, John, JD, Piero, Nina. I think that's it, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so, a lot of it is just like people applying to put on lasers and us vetting them, right, and determining whether
it's an excellent way. I just congratulated today. There is no super who's this and that, little this, just down to the point.
I just said out loud. I mean, so there's that, and then Danielle and I speak a lot with each other, and we've written some grants where she takes the lead, but I'm helping her out with the grant, those kinds of things. So there's an interaction, and then there's also reporting to the board about what's happening with lasers. So there's that aspect. So it's not like a massive job, but
and it's voluntary.
It's voluntary.
Amazing.
You don't get paid.
We don't get paid. Yeah.
Nobody gets paid.
Tami, can I ask? So I mean, these laser meetings that Tim and I, have been. This is our second time.
Yeah.
I understand why it's kind of separate. It's like a separate weekend, and I'm just wondering, as far as funding to get there. I mean, I see many of these faces in like Isaiah, and what if we tag on to a large, relevant conference and do like extra day? At least you don't have to fly separately. Yeah, CCA, SCA.
Yeah, I mean, it is true that a lot of, I don't tend to go to those meetings.
Right,
but that's fine. I could go.
At least for half of us can cut down some travel costs.
The thing is, I have to say, I think there's, on one hand, that's practical and the meeting should happen. On the other hand, there's something to be said about doing it completely separate and isolated from everything. Because if we're in CAA or ICA or any one of these, most likely most of us are doing something within it. So we're distracted, stressed, and doing
it depends on the level of work you want to get accomplished.
That's what I mean.
If you want to meet for an hour and a half,
I think meeting is a good idea. Who's at ICA? Let's meet up. Great.
I do think that tagging it on to another conference, to me, is incredibly overwhelming. Like, it's like an enormous amount of preparation for something like CAA to begin with. And you're so busy, then to add another entire day after that is.
I mean, as an informal gathering or dinner.
Yeah, that's fine. I think that should always happen.
Yeah,
that should always happen.
Yeah, there should be lasers at those. Sort of like a one-off lasers type of thing, where people can get together. I think it just helps to build community more and people connect more.
Because I'm the VP for Mid-American College Art Association, and we have a thing at CAA, but really all we do is check in.
Right.
We check in and talk. We say, hey, things are going great. But
that's
the real meat and potatoes is when we have our own conference.
Yeah.
And we're able to schedule a day like yesterday. I don't think you could have got that done.
No.
At a conference. But I think for community, always doing CAA, I think is a great move.
Well, we do it.
Yeah.
We are really.
And Women's Caucus for Art has a separate thing at CAA.
Yeah.
As a separate
but it's the same kind of thing. It's 2 hours.
It's a lot of stress. I totally agree.
Yeah.
I think Christiana
we really
had
do it. We really do it.
Yes,
But it's
there's
just
like
2
an
hours.
organization in Europe.
What's that?
There's an organization in Europe that is specifically like for travel grants. So I think sometimes it's like it might be useful if you segment like the funding. And like you kind of seek like a kind in sponsorship with some organizations that they're already dealing with that. So I think in Europe there are like 2 or 3 organizations that they only provide travel grants for journalists, for artists, for conferences. So you have to apply individually, but maybe like if you apply as an organization, so you can also bring like more people to different talks.
You mean to come to the meeting?
Yes.
This meeting?
Or
I think Europe's probably more enlightened than US for funding.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. Are there such things where you can apply?
There are travel grants. They're all varied. They all, of course, have their stipulations, right?
Yeah.
So, but I've looked at a lot of them, and we can put out here's travel grant stuff. But I think that ultimately, as we as we think through the process, I think in the funding that we ask for, I mean, I always feel like the things I've been asking for in funding are like, we need somebody to help manage something from the inside, but I also been asking money for travel for the laser hosts and support for both on the documentation side and stipend side for speaker fees. We've done 2 grants so far. If you have other places that you think we could apply that you think would work for this, please let me know, because we can talk about how that would work. It takes a lot to put those together, but now we've done a couple of them. We have a little bit of an idea of what we need to do to push this out.
Sponsorship from like specific airlines.
Yeah, I think that's also possible. I think we could talk to the airlines also. It's just another added thing. So that's an action item, but it's it's just another. People say just go ask a company, and trust me, I've been talking to companies nonstop, like weekly. It's not like
it's not really
it's not that easy.
No, it's not.
So those of you who
they don't really want to talk to us,
right?
Those of you who want to go to SIGGRAPH this year, I mean, Leonardo is already involved with SIGGRAPH, but also SIGGRAPH this coming year is in Vancouver, and the art exhibition curator is Andres Burbano, who isn't very much connected to Leonardo, and if you want to meet there, I just want to.
What are the dates?
I don't know. I
think it's like the very beginning of August.
It usually is, yeah.
So have you approached the Sloan Foundation?
No, but I do have them on the list. The foundation stuff is, we're just starting. We actually, Leonardo over this last year has done a lot of, internal infrastructure and organizational changes, and one of them is we just created a fundraising committee. And before this year, we actually didn't have any materials to give to fundraisers, believe it or not. But we have all that now. We're approaching quite a number of foundations and companies to help build that support. But just understand, like, this stuff. For those of you who've been on the fundraising side, it's not like it happens overnight. This is a process, so just be patient with it, and we'll see what happens, and I'll report back.
I mean, there's a bunch. Sloan foundations are good.
Because they have a specific one for science outreach, and that's kind of what we're doing, all of us.
Yeah.
So it'll be a really good, and
Yeah.
the dollar amount for that is also pretty high.
Yeah.
They don't love visual art very much, I have to say.
Well, they hear things like, movies with like science people talking at the movie.
They like mass culture. They like movies. They don't like art shows.
Well, they have a new call for new media, actually.
Really?
Alfred
P. Sloan Foundation.
I think it's worth looking at.
I think it's
worth looking at.
Yeah, I've looked and whiffed.
Well, I think though they might not like visual art or whatever. I think it's often hard to for people. The foundations are focused on community impact a lot. I mean, that's their deal. But if you're having community impact, which the lasers do, it's a different thing than just saying, oh, well, we're supporting visual artists. I mean, we're talking about scientists going out and communicating across disciplines in a very specific way. So maybe for that kind of thing, they would be more interested. I think that's a good choice. Sure.
Jill has.
Oh, Jill, yes.
Well, I think the funding's always a really big issue, but we have this situation here, which I think a lot of people elsewhere also face, is that like you apply for grant and the people who are making the decisions are either artists or scientists and never both. Mm-hmm. So the panels are really not mixed properly to make the decision about doing something like laser, in fact. So that means that, it's very, we fall in this crack, this funding cracks, and that's like really difficult. Yeah. So my suggestion would be to like, for example, in science funding, your impact has to be measured somehow. In our case, it would be like community questionnaires. It would have to be measured somehow. So in art, well, that's like, a very different story. So I think it's quite hard to negotiate funding in this area. That's what I'm just saying. That's one of the problems. We're sort of constantly falling in this crack between these two different sources of funding.
Yeah, I agree. It's a tricky one. Hey, that's not science. That's not art.
Anyone has any experience on National Science Foundation's interest in funding this type of?
They love it.
Love it. I've had funding.
Me too.
I've had funding.
Category would it be under?
Through which category?
So I got funding for this is kind of the broader impact section of this is a question about the National Science Foundation, Jill. I don't know if you heard that. But the art science falls under science outreach and broader impacts, how to reach a wide community audience. And I recently went to a talk on the foundation's pitch for undergraduate student education. And again,
the REU?
No, this is for Department of Undergraduate Education. And they are now thinking about moving from STEM to STEAM. And so they really want to connect the arts with the sciences. So they are very excited about these kinds of endeavors.
The NSF is interested in
This is an NSF thing that you're saying?
Yeah. This isn't the one where they're collaborating with the NEA, is it?
No,
NSF,
no.
What is
This is
the
the Department of Undergraduate Education
Okay.
at the National Science Foundation.
So which is the grant that is where the NEA and the NSF is combining? Is that around media?
I wish JD is on here because he is part of that process. And I know that that's coming out in February.
Okay.
Yeah, I can't speak to that. So if JD comes on, you can ask that question again.
And that was part of what component of them?
Department
Okay,
of Undergraduate
so just to keep along here, it's generating. It's my job for these 2 days, keeping
us on task.
You're doing a great job with
keeping
it,
us
Tami.
going here. Okay, so so other action items. We talked about funding quite a bit, I think, and I think we all acknowledge we need funding for. It sounds like essentially two things to be focused on. So one is getting some funding so people can come to these meetings, and then funding for honoraria for speakers, and then actually funding for Leonardo to be able to develop and increase the impact of lasers. And really it's Danielle doing it with interns who aren't paid. So I'd like to be able to, increase that aspect of it. So those are the things that have to come out by funding. So it's great to have ideas about where to apply. I think that's helpful for us actually to figure out what to do. Okay, anything else that people want
Christiana?
to do?
Can I ask, is crowdfunded for the
Crowdfunding? We did a little bit of crowdfunding stuff last year.
Did it help? Was it successful?
No, for what?
Didn't we do that thing where it was like the East Bay thing and everybody was supposed to get?
Well, that wasn't really crowdfunding. That's just donor fundraising. But crowdfunding is sort of like you have a giveaway thing, or you have a product you're going to have at the end.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean
That'll be our swag.
We may do that.
Our swag will be a giveaway.
We are thinking a lot about that for the 50th stuff because actually a lot of people have said, I want, including Patricia, they want 50th swag. And so we actually may do that because I think a lot of people keep asking about that. So
I saw I did a workshop and it was this inflated swimming pool next to Thames, and they had a special installation and they actually managed to get one 100
swimming pools?
150,000 pounds just for this project.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure. I think there must be something that you kind of handle a certain way.
Yeah, I don't think I think crowdfunding the lasers would be the thing that would be what's attractive. It would have to be an outcome of something else, so like an exhibition, or it could be an event. But we have to sort of think through that. I'm not against crowdfunding. It's just there's a lot of I've been involved in big crowdfunding campaigns, and it's a lot of work.
And the swimming pool is not a fair giveaway.
Huh?
The swimming pool is not a fair giveaway.
Right. Well, experiences. We could do experiences. We could make some fun. Art.
Well, no, when I used to work at the Headland Center for the Arts, and we used to raffle a dinner with David Ireland, and then I would help prepare dinner with David Ireland, and we would serve 10 people at the dinner, and that was the raffle. So I wonder, we can get very creative about what the giveaway would be.
Yeah.
Scientist to summer.
Maybe we could do a weekend at Jurassic, a week at like a Jurassic base.
Yeah,
It's beautiful
dinner at Jurassic. What about a Hawks dinner at Jurassic would be the giveaway.
Food's really good at Jurassic.
Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. So you work with the chef and do a Hawks. That would be the giveaway. That you get an invitation to the Hawks dinner.
That sounds really cool.
See what I mean? I'm good at this.
All right. Okay. I'm gonna hit you up on that. All right. I'm gonna hit you up on that.
Yeah.
A lot of money.
It's a good idea.
Yeah, I think it's definitely possible.
Jurassic.